Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this webinar. My name is Paul Lavender, and I'm the Head of Education at Karger Publishers. We're an independent health science publisher, family-owned for over 130 years, based in Basel, Switzerland. So Karger is well known for its journals, book series, and medical handbooks. In fact, the very first Karger publication was a handbook published in 1890. In the meantime, we've moved beyond publication into creation of handbooks, CME accredited courses, summary sheets, infographics, animations, plain language summaries, and podcasts. And if you're one of those people like me who listens to webinars while looking at another browser tab, then I'd encourage you to open fastfacts.com to see some examples of our work. That's fastfacts.com. Now, these resources are free to access, and you may very well find something relevant and useful for your field. So recently, we've expanded into the creation and publication of materials for patients. And we found this area to be extremely fulfilling, but sometimes with less clear-cut guidance, as patient centricity is a concept that's still really evolving and maturing. And that's why we've sponsored this webinar, to offer some clarity and guidance in this topic. And to do this, we've invited 3 experts in this field, and I'm delighted and very excited to introduce you to these guests. So first, you'll see Bob Perry. Now, Bob's story is so inspiring, we could easily devote an entire webinar to that alone. In 2015, Bob was diagnosed with Waldenström Macroglobulinemia and became a powerful patient advocate. He's worked directly with us at Karger on the creation of some wonderful materials to help other patients with this condition. So first, welcome, Bob. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
And second, Heather Gorse. Heather is the industry giving coordinator of the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, the largest nonprofit dedicated to colorectal cancer in the USA. And she brings a huge amount of practical knowledge and experience on how to manage operations and relationships with industry partners. So welcome, Heather. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
And last but not least, Catherine Richards-Golini. Catherine has been the spearhead of Karger's patient-driven materials. She's specialized in creating, developing, and editing resources for patients and healthcare practitioners. She is incredibly talented at writing plain language summaries, as I know from experience, because Catherine and I put together a free-to-access course on how to write plain language summaries, which has been completed by hundreds of students. And if you're interested in that and you have a browser tab open, go to courses.karger.com. That's courses.karger.com, where you can find the course that we've put together. So Catherine, welcome.
Thanks, Paul.
And to all of you, a big thank you for being here. And I'd like to get the ball rolling with you, Catherine, if I can. And we can see the title, or the big crux of the title there in the slide, patient-centered or patient-driven. And when the title first appeared to me, it was your suggestion for a title. I thought I wouldn't know how to answer that. What's the significance of this title?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Don't get me wrong, patient-centered, patient-centric, fabulous word. There can't be too many people listening to this webinar who haven't heard of it. And most people, I would imagine, have more than a passing familiarity with the term. And that's partly the problem, because we're such a diverse group of stakeholders, and there are so many people using the term patient-centered and patient-centric that I can't believe we're all using it in the same way. I'm sure if we asked 50 people to define it, we'd get different definitions, and that's fine. I suspect as well that some people are using the term as a bit of a buzzword, and they haven't actually stopped to reflect on what it actually means. We can put patients in the center of anything. Cue slide, please. We can put patients in the center of anything, but if we're not listening to them, if we're not engaging with them, if we're not acting on what they're saying, that isn't patient centricity, and it's not patient centric. So I kind of like the term patient driven because it doesn't come with any of that baggage. And patient driven reminds me, and the people I work with as well, I might add, that we're putting patients in the driving seat when we create healthcare content. And by that, I mean that we're engaging with patients from the off, from the very beginning. And I dare say these conversations are also happening before we even see a project. They're happening with industry partners and patient advocacy groups as well. But patient-driven is a very active term in the way that patient-centric could even be described as a bit passive, and patient-driven is not. We talk with patients at the very beginning, with our patient advocacy partners. We organize focus groups. We look at the proposed content. If patients want changes, we make those changes, and they're with us all the way through the process. So it really is co-collaboration. And it does matter because we know, and we'll hear from Bob in a minute why it matters to patients and patient groups, but we know that healthcare information resources that have been created in this way are much more likely to be utilized, to be read, to be shared when patients and patient advocates are actively involved in their creation. And that's good news for us as a publisher, and it's good news for industry sponsors. I hope that answers your question.
Very well, thanks, Catherine. So, Bob, if I can come to you now, as someone with experience of working with publishers and advocacy groups to develop the patient education resources, what do you feel are the benefits to patients of actively being involved in this information development?
Okay, Paul, well, thanks for that question. And by the way, I love Catherine's title. And I agree totally with what she's just said, because patient-driven is what is the way forward. I mean, as a patient myself, we need to be involved in this kind of thing. And I'm going to refer to some groups later on that their ethos is for anything relating to an illness to be patient-driven. And what I would say is that there are lots of publications out there. There have been for many years, but as a layman myself, I'm not a doctor, not a nurse. I'm just a guy with a condition. So many of them have been and were written by clearly some very specialized, clever people, but in a way that almost like a science manual. And if you haven't got a degree in science, they're very difficult, some of them, to understand. And so I do really think it's important for patients to be involved in making these resources and making them, what should I say, more accessible, more understandable, more relatable to them as a patient. Yes, of course, the document, the publication has to have the facts of whatever the illness is, but it needs to foster the ability within the patient to either question those facts or be armed with those facts when they next go to see their healthcare professional. The patient should then be able to better process what this condition is he or she has got, how they can come to terms with it, and as I say, just how to question their condition when they next go to see their healthcare professional or their next checkup. And an example of that might be in frequently asked questions. I mean, you could. There are so many questions that need to be asked, and I don't know. The publications are getting better. I'm going to refer to a few later in another question, but basically that is the importance of these documents to us as patients, is to be accessible, to be understandable, comprehensible, and to empower us to go and move forward with our healthcare professionals with some sort of degree of knowledge about what our shared future will be. Just very quickly, when I first met my consultant, I won't name her, but she introduced herself by first name and asked me what I prefer to be called. And she said to me, I said, that's very sort of informal. And she said to me, but Bob, we're going to be together for at least the next 20 years. So that's the kind of relationship that I have with my consultant. And just the ability to be armed and empowered with all this knowledge would make that relationship so much better for both of us moving forward.
Thanks so much, Bob. I think that's a really good point, that the purpose of these materials is for patients to actively to have conversations, actions, and come to terms with the disease. There's meant to be a palpable outcome, not just passively reading. And
exactly.
Thank you to the people who are already asking questions, by the way, and some of those we're going to get to. I see already we have them as part of our plan, so please hang on for those. And Bob, you mentioned the patient advocacy groups, and I was wondering, how important are patient advocacy groups when it comes to kind of creating and disseminating this information, and particularly for patients with rare diseases? And what are the challenges faced by those groups?
Yeah, the groups are crucial. I use my condition as an example. It's a very rare condition, and on diagnosis, you feel very lonely. First of all, you don't know what it is you've got. My doctor said to me, I said, I've got to meet somebody else with this condition. He said, oh, you won't be able to meet anybody else because there's so few of you. Well, that made me feel even worse. And so there were no answers, and there were lots of questions. So groups are so important. We with my condition, especially here in the UK, and I know in the US, there's a lot of advocacy groups and elsewhere around the world, where you can meet. Sadly, because of COVID, it's more on Zoom now than anything else. But they're great tools. Is you meet on Zoom, and you can ask each other questions. Patients asking each other questions, relating to each other, empathizing with each other, supporting each other. You might have the answer to a question as a patient. You might have the answer to a question that one of the other patients on your screen asks, and that's so empowering, so encouraging. That arms them with the next question that when they go to see their consultant next. And sorry, so what I was going to say, and going back to the ability, it gives them the ability to challenge and be better received by their consultant, and you can compare consultants even as well, and start talking about second opinions if in this this group. You can identify that, wow, this guy doesn't appear to be getting the right advice, or maybe his or her consultant isn't too knowledgeable about the condition, and perhaps go to another doctor. So that's really important for the groups. What are the challenges in getting people? Well, what we found with certainly with WMUK was the ability to set up webinars or podcasts, whatever you want to call them, whereby we could have a particular topic, and seek out a guest speaker who will be a specialist either from the UK or from the US or wherever, who can guide us through what that particular issue is and give us answers and give us ideas about when we go and see our consultant the next time. So the groups, advocacy groups, are so important. It takes away from the loneliness of living with this condition into becoming part of a family, really, a family of fellow patients, fellow people who are living with this condition.
Thanks, Bob.
Sorry, your slide there. If you can go back one slide. Sure. There, yeah. So that is my condition there. As you can see, 3 to 4 cases per million. So there's not many of us. We're not all aged 65 to 70. I think we're getting a lot younger, maybe because of better diagnosis strategies, better blood testing. I know of a lady here in the UK who was diagnosed at 29 with a family, with children. Imagine how lonely she felt when she got a diagnosis. Was she going to live long enough to see her children grow up, for example? All these things that they need answers to. And yeah, no cure yet, manageable with a range of treatments which are amazingly developing very, very quickly. And I'll come on to that in another question later. But thanks for that slide.
Thank you, Bob. And actually, one question has just come up in the chat, which I think is a good one to address now. And then I'll take that on to Heather with the same question. Where do you recommend patients go to identify opportunities to get actively involved in co-creation efforts? Are there reputable channels, forums, platforms? I mean, I presume you would say patient advocacy groups, but...
Okay, so I've just put a slide up there now. So this was going to be part of my later question, but I can certainly deal with this now. So, and I'm speaking really for the whole of the world here. There are some great organisations for my condition, for our condition. So here in the UK, we've got WMUK, which is a great source of information. Lots of webinars, documentaries, all sorts of resources on that site. The IWMF is the International Waldenström's Macroglobulinemia Foundation, which is the global, as it says, international. It is at the moment very North American centric, and I've told them off about that. And with the help of some others from around the globe, particularly in Sweden and Australia, and India, we're trying to push that out to a more global sort of thing. But some amazing resources on there. They've been going for over 10 years, maybe even 20 years. And then even down there in Australia, where they're probably all asleep right now, WM Aussies, only they could come up with a name like that, but there we go. An amazing organisation. So, and I know that in France, in Holland, in Germany, in Spain, each country, it seems, has its own WM. And so if you're talking about other rare conditions, then, for example, sickle cell cancer is another fairly rare condition that affects mainly our black communities. I know here in the UK there's specific charities for those, and I'm sure there are in those other countries. It's about finding these groups online, making sure that they are a bona fide, reputable group, and accessing them, and each of them will have a support facility to guide you, to direct you to where you need to be. So, for example, I am the IWMF affiliate for Ireland, even though I live in the UK. I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but anybody in Ireland suffering with WM can contact me through the IWMF or WMUK, and they can join a support group. And I'm sure that's the same for all of these conditions.
Thanks, Bob. And actually, there's some lovely messages of support and coming through on the questions as well for you. So maybe I can ask the same question then to Heather as well. So this has come up in the chat. And where do you recommend patients should go to identify opportunities to get actively involved and lend their voice to any co-creation efforts for materials?
Yeah, so just to kind of echo what Bob was saying, the Alliance based out of the US, we have many opportunities, whether they are online communities, where anyone who's a part of the community, family, caregiver, patient themselves, they can reach out for support. We actually utilize some of these online communities to vet individuals for specific opportunities for when industry partners reach out to us as well. But we also host things like events. So we have our Walk to End Colon Cancer series. And so 16 cities throughout the US, people who are collaboratively involved in this disease can become a part of a community. They can talk with industry partners who are sponsors for these events. There are many, I can go on for a while about all the programs that we offer, but advocacy groups do offer these things. So it's really about getting involved with which advocacy group is specific to your condition, and then seeing what they offer.
One question that's just kind of coming up, one caveat to the question that came up, assuming an advocacy group exists. Are we at the stage now where we see advocacy groups for many rare diseases, or is it the case that a patient may have a rare disease and actually need to start their own group?
To Heather, sorry.
Oh, sorry, no, for Bob, if you'd like to come in on that, it's fine.
No, I would say, what I would say is my own experience of this was when I was diagnosed back in 2015. there was no real advocacy group apart from the WMUK charity. And so I took it upon myself, with the help, I have to say, of my consultant. I set up a local group, and then that led me to set up a number of other groups around the country. So please, if you're watching this and you haven't got an advocacy group, you can set them up. Not easy to do because of the privacy aspect of, for example, your consultant can't give you the names of other patients. But I'll very quickly tell you what I did. My consultant said, if you want to set up a support group, I'll help you. Can I give your telephone number and email address out to any patient that I see from now on? And I said, please do. And then very quickly, within a year, I had a group of 30 fellow patients, and that's how we developed it moving forward. So yes, please, if you're watching this without an advocacy group, either drop me an email and I can help you, or like I just said, speak to your consultant. Your consultant needs to be on board with you. In doing that, but you need to do it. Yeah.
It's amazing to think that you went from initially being told you won't meet many people with this disease to then having like a community of 30 people within a year through forming an advocacy group. That's incredible.
Yeah. Thank you.
Heather, would you like to add anything to that? What was that?
Yeah, I mean, considering, the advocacy group that I work with, the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, even though it's a very prevalent disease, we've been around for 25 years, and this disease has been around for much longer than that. So I do think that there's always the opportunity to develop that kind of group, that kind of advocacy group, even if one already exists, because the whole idea is to amplify your voice and to spread awareness and create a community for others to feel comfortable. So if you can find one that you feel comfortable being a part of, wonderful. If you feel that compelled to start your own, even better. I think the sky's the limit.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to combine, the question I had for you really was, I think we've seen through Bob the value of advocacy groups and patient-driven materials for the patient. From your side, do you work a lot with industry as well? What is the value for industry sponsors and supporters of patient-driven materials?
Well, what I can tell you is it's been very exciting because we have seen quite an increase in requests from our industry partners to have patients be involved in their projects, whether they are events that they would like to bring a patient to speak with and hear about their story, whether it's advisory boards, reviewing materials. There are a number of ways that our industry partners are asking for patients to become more involved, which is great because as a patient advocacy organization, it's about trust and transparency for our community. And what better way to provide more qualitative data than to share the experiences directly from who their audience is. So I think that their insights and their experiences, these things go well beyond any type of clinical measurement.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think one thing that's also mentioned a lot in the chat now is, do you think that industry is, there specifically Pharma is said there, but industry in general, is it doing enough when it comes to engagement with patients?
Our industry partners doing enough when it comes to being involved with patients?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, personally, I can only share from my experience. And like I said, we do a lot of opportunities. We actually just recently had a partner that we've been working with for years who is getting a new clinical trial going in the colorectal cancer space. And they're like, you know what? We'd really like to get some patients involved that have clinical trial experience, because we would like to see how we can set up our protocol and make it the best experience for them. So we're just seeing all of these new ideas and opportunities. And so, while are they doing a lot? Yes. Could they do more? Absolutely.
Can I just say I would agree with Heather on that. I mean, the same with our condition here. We've got some pharma companies, fast moving, developing innovative drugs, and yes, they have come to our community, both with financial assistance and also with training opportunities, etc., etc. So, I agree with Heather. They are doing their bit, but yeah, maybe they could do more.
Great. And Heather, I think from the perspective of a patient advocacy group, are there any key best practices that we should be aware of when facilitating industry-supported collaboration when creating patient-driven materials? That there are potential conflicts of interest. So presumably there are either guidelines or at least best practice that people should be aware of.
Yeah, good question. I'm happy to share the process that I walk through. I actually have a slide prepared. Let's see, here we go. So this is just kind of the steps that I go through when it comes to an industry partner patient collaboration project. So whether there is an initiated phone call from our partner or whether the idea of getting a patient involved comes up in a regular call, there's obviously the need to discuss what the project details are, timeline, budget, what the expectations for the patient will be. And then we will always encourage that there be some patient compensation just because they're sharing their time, they're giving their time, and also they're providing a lot of insight that for some might be very, very difficult to discuss at times. So once we decide that we're going to move forward with involving a patient in a project, I will take the lead on researching patients and choosing the correct one. So we can have a request for a patient that has specific identifiers. So in the colorectal cancer space, that might be a biomarker, that might be clinical trial experience. There are a number of reasons as to why an industry partner would want someone with specific identifiers that pertains to their project. So once we make the selection, which can be done by outreach in our online communities. We have a volunteer task force that they work with patient or volunteers who are patients or were patients at one point who are survivors now, that have those established connections and relationships. So we work very collaboratively internally to find the right individuals for these projects. And from there, I will then do the outreach. And for me, it's very important that there's full transparency. There are no questions as to what is expected of them. Because again, that's where the trust and transparency comes as a patient advocacy group. That's my job. So while I always respect their right to decline, we want to encourage people that this is about creating awareness and sharing their story because of how it can be impactful to others. There's always written consent involved, whether it's just for their participation, maybe it's a patient story, so involving their them maybe submitting some images to be used for a story. Then from there, we would take all of that patient information and share it with our industry partner to make sure that everything aligns. And then I will connect our industry partner and our patients and then remain involved in the communication as far as I need to. And then just as a courtesy, this is just on my own choice, I always reach out to the patient before to make sure they still feel comfortable, and then after as a follow-up. And then I will also ensure that any compensation that needs to be done is fulfilled.
Super. Thank you so much. And thank you for the slide. That makes it a lot clearer as well. So, Catherine, I think let's think about it in terms of timelines. So somebody may come to Heather, followed all the best materials, and now they've been put in touch with the actual creator of the materials, which would be you. And what best practices or standards are there for you to follow as a creator and as a publisher when you're creating patient-driven materials?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I would say that we've collaborated with the Colorectal Alliance, as you know, and I work closely with Heather, and every single thing she says she does, she did. And it was a really, really enjoyable collaborative experience. I felt that I was in very safe hands, but I also felt the respect that Heather was showing to the patients that she was introducing to us. And from my perspective, patient advocacy groups or patient associations, patient groups, I've seen a question in the chat. I would say these are all fairly synonymous terms. They act as gatekeepers for their patients.
Mm-hmm.
They are not going to be introducing or sending patients to any old Joe. So when I finally do get introduced to the patients, I know an awful lot of work has gone into prior to introducing me to them. But I would say that elements of best practice are the same, really. Any kind of collaborative patient engagement, no matter who the stakeholder is, has these core principles at their heart: respect and accessibility, roles and responsibilities, and transparency and communication and documentation. We make it absolutely clear what it is we would like the patient to be doing. Now, that may be to patient focus groups. Those focus groups might last for 1 hour. It may be just one focus group, depends on the project, followed up by review. How long is that review going to take them? I break it down into 2 hours. Am I asking for an hour, 2, 3, 4 hours? As Heather said, patients, their time, their precious time is being used to help us produce something. I should make it very clear what that time load is going to be. Agreements written in plain language, right? An agreement that anybody can understand. What are they agreeing to do? What are the limits of this agreement? What are their rights to withdraw from the agreement? I think that's very, very important that is in black and white. But also, I think, what are we as a publisher thinking for the future when we've produced a publication? We may want to do spin-offs further down the line. We may want to interview the patient for our waiting room. There's a blog site that we have for patient information and articles of general interest. But will the patient be willing to? Will they be willing to appear on that? Is it okay to use their name? I have to ask permission to use their name in the booklet, and so far every patient I've met has said, yeah, sure, that's no problem. But there may be a day when someone says, no, thank you, I don't want my name to be used. Question of privacy and stuff. So yes, I would say that the elements are all exactly the same. And compensation, paying patients for their time and giving them a choice of how they receive that compensation. Being respectful of the fact that some patients are not working because of their health condition. They may be on welfare, payment is going to cause them problems, and it may be irrespective of that, they may prefer to be donating the money, but we need to give patients a choice and we need to compensate them for the time that they give up to us.
Thank you. That's really clear. And just related to the payment, one question that came up, an open question for anyone. Can you recommend specific fair market value calculators for determining appropriate compensation based on expertise and role? Bob's laughing, so you've got some experience with this, Bob.
No, I'm not going to answer that question. I let me tell you, I have been compensated for this webinar, and I chose for sponsorship, and I'm very grateful for that. I would have done it for nothing anyway, but yeah, I think Catherine's made an amazing point that this has taken me, I'm doing this hour now, and it's taken me a couple of hours to think about my answers. So yeah, I think you do need to consider that if you want to attract the right, the responses from your contributors. Yeah.
There are guidelines available, tables of suggested recompense for these kind of projects. The UK's, I forget now, I wonder if it's the National Institute of Health Research, who have a table of suggested compensation, laughably small, I might add. But I mean, it's for academic research. It's for things like this. It's for all manner of anything that seems to involve patients. So, but yes, laughably small. I think the days of give them a cup of tea and a sandwich and they'll be okay. There's still elements of that. US, there is also a table. I consulted that table when I worked, well, probably with the Colorectal Alliance. I wanted to feel sure that we were offering decent money, and I believe there's also something similar for Europe. Yeah, so we don't make it up. Well, I don't anyway. Perhaps some
Yeah,
publishers.
and I will just add that the compensation will vary depending on the I guess the extremes of the project. How much time will be involved. Some focus groups are maybe an hour. Some projects are multiple convenings over a period of time. Some require that a patient travels. So yes, there are tables that exist, but I can give you a very vague answer and just say that it very much depends on the expectations of the patient and the timeline of the project.
We have one question coming in. Will there be a recording of the session? Unfortunately, the person has to nip offline to another session. Yes, there will be. Everyone attending this will have a full recording. So I think it's a really interesting point, and I know my experience was actually the other end, paying healthcare practitioners to take place in advisory boards, and then there were so many regulations around fair market value, and you had to always go with the lowest common denominator. So if you're having a representative from a low-income country, then the amount you could spend was so limited, and everybody had to be treated the same, and it got very, very complicated. And there was one point where I just remember in frustration thinking we can only take these people to McDonald's, because if you run the event in a high-income country, then the currencies just simply don't match. So I think maybe we can take a few of those links and put them into the webinar summary, some of the links that you've mentioned with the tables. And
Sure.
when we send out the email, we'll have the links in there. So I think this has been fascinating, and one of the other big things that comes up and is when a patient finds a resource, and let's be honest, there are so many resources available at the moment, and if you just Google it, any condition, you will end up with so many hits. And then you start to click in and you start to research, and can I trust it? Can I not trust it? Is it out of date? Is it biased? And this will be a question I think I'd like each of you to answer in turn, maybe starting with Bob. How does a patient know that a resource is trusted?
Okay, so for me and for certainly the WM community in the UK and in the US, what we would always look for is who has taken part in the production of this publication. Very quick, I don't know if you can see this, but there's 3 IWMF publications there about WM. One for patients, one for nurses, one for physicians, 3 different publications. Your own publication here, Karger, written by our own Dr. Shirley Dessar from the UK. And then the Lymphoma Association, which I was given, this is the 2014 edition, so it's now 10 years old and well out of date. But how do we trust them? Looking at who the authors were, looking at who has supported it. Has it been supported by the IWMF, by WM UK, by WM Aussies? A very quick story. I remember talking to somebody in my support role who said, I've read on the internet, I've only got 5 years to live. Total and utter nonsense, but she had gone to the internet, put in WM, and the first thing she read is that her life expectancy is 5 years. Nonsense. So you've got to be very careful on how you access this stuff. And I would always say, look at first of all, who's produced that document, and in compilation with who. There's some big names in WM around the world. Any WM people watching this will know those names. I'm not going to rattle through them, but just see who is supporting or authoring it, or collaborating is the word I'm talking about. Yeah, collaborating. Sorry.
Thank you, Bob. Heather, would you add anything to that?
Yes. So in the US, we have a number of ways that we can essentially show that a document should be trusted. So we have publications typically will have some type of copyright involved. At the Alliance, if we are doing any type of medical presentations, publications, surveys, data, we use the institutional review board who will essentially review the data or the survey or the content, which is a process, I will tell you. But in order for it to be labeled as trusted, we have to go through the IRB. So someone also is an organization that is handling health content in the patient community. We have our own medical and scientific advisory committee that we reach out to so that they can review, provide feedback, and let us know when something is ready. But then just lastly, when it comes to like a nonprofit, you can check to see if a nonprofit is an accredited organization. So specifically with the Alliance, we have 3 accreditations. So one is through Charity Navigator, and then there's GuideStar, and then one that is mostly common heard of is the Better Business Bureau. So when it comes to the Alliance developing any types of resources, they would then obviously be tied to us. And so they can be trusted because we have these known accreditations.
Thank you. And Catherine, anything from your side on that point?
Yeah, I just pick up the PIF tick that was mentioned there at the top of Heather's slide. Now, obviously, any kind of endorsement or quality mark is going to help patients navigate the nightmare of medical information that we have on the internet. The good thing about the PIF tick is that it's a nice natty little logo. It's related specifically to the UK, but it does increasingly have global reach. So I think it's probably a question of time, really, before we see it in Europe as well, and maybe even the States. The PIF tick is the only independently assessed quality mark for patient healthcare information that I'm aware of. So it's not government, it's not a government organisation, it's independent. Currently, there are about 150, I believe, different patient associations, patient advocacy groups, most of them based in the UK, also National Health Service trusts, and recently individual doctors and healthcare professionals who like to make their own content for their YouTube channels and Instagram posts. They are also getting the accreditation. And to get this accreditation, you have to prove that you are creating material that follows best practice in health literacy and digital health literacy. There are about 10 criteria, and we got our PIF tick last year in 2023. And it's instantly recognizable. If you know what it is, you should be reassured when you see it.
Thanks. That's a really good point. And yeah, we were delighted to obtain the PIF tick. It was a ringing endorsement of your work as well, Catherine. So as we draw to the close, I think and we've kind of gone through chronologically through benefits, best practice, providing quality, and one of the questions I think always comes up, and particularly for an industry partner, they are asked to sponsor and allocate budget towards the creation of a patient-driven material. And of course, they have to go back and justify and say, well, I could have spent that budget here, I could have spent it here. Where's the impact of this? What can I take away from it and see that me allocating budget there instead of somewhere else was a good idea? So what I'd like to do is ask each of you again in turn, how can the impact of a patient-driven resource be measured? What are some of the useful metrics? So, Catherine, can we start with you on that?
Well, I know Heather's got quite a lot to say about this, and I was about to say, and I agree with everything that Heather said, but then you came to me first. Well, downloads. One of the obvious things is downloads, but I have to say that the problem with downloads is we don't know what people are doing with material once they've downloaded it. We recently produced a patient information video and did some targeted user testing, and this was set up by our colleagues at Karger. That was fascinating because we had 5 or 6 questions to ask the people of this video, very specific questions. We were asking HCPs, healthcare professionals, and we were also asking patients. So we were really able to understand whether or not that patient video was understandable, whether the patient had more knowledge at the end of it, whether they felt more confident, whether they thought the language was pitched appropriately. So that kind of testing gives us a wealth of information. Now you can go to Heather and she will tell us all the wonderful things she was going to tell us. All of which I agree with, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll just add one thing on the downloads though as well. Just when we've looked at them, I have discovered like massive discrepancies between downloads from the publisher's site and from, say, Kindle. And sometimes you have hardly any downloads from one and a pile from the other, and then vice versa with a different resource. It's fascinating. So I think you have to you track all your channels when you're looking at downloads. Yeah. I'm sorry, Heather, could you talk us through?
Yeah, no problem. So the 2 things that came to mind, so as Catherine mentioned, so digital, and I'll get into that in just a moment because I do have an example of a project that that I managed with one of our partners. But we worked on a project with an industry partner last year who had developed a new stage 4 treatment for colorectal cancer, and their goal was to develop these patient kits that would be distributed by their healthcare, their oncologists or their providers. And so they were doing the tracking just by distribution of units. But what was great is that in the development of those kits, patient-driven, patient collaboration, we hosted a patient advisory board that allowed the patients to receive these kits, take a look at the contents, review the brochures, and then sit on a call with the industry partner and provide feedback about, the content that was there. Was it user friendly? There was a calendar. There were other components of the kit that could be useful for these patients. So a great collaborative project, but a way that you can see the way that they track unit distribution. But yes, we do a lot of measurement through digital tracking. And I'll just kind of run through. So we have our Alliance website. We also power a patient platform known as Blue HQ. We develop a bit.ly link so that we can track where people are coming from and they're clicking onto. We can see what pages might have the most impact, or we also include those bit.ly links in social media posts. Social media is a huge opportunity for tracking engagement, tracking impressions, downloadable resources, as Catherine mentioned. But we also have newsletters, we have blogs, we have a YouTube page, and then we have our Salesforce, which we're able to track our patients, our partners, and individuals. So just to quickly run you through a project that I managed. So I partnered with, collaborated with, actually a company that specializes in a very specific type of treatment for colorectal cancer patients who are stage 4 and have tumors to their liver. And as a patient advocacy community or group, that we want to be able to have a strong amount of content that touches each individual and what their diagnosis might be. We knew that we needed to really elevate and improve this HAI therapy content that we had available on our website and our platform. So our goal was to expand that therapy content between our 2 platforms. So from there, we kind of built together a project timeline. And so these are just some snapshots of what the final product ended up looking like. So we have these embedded bit.ly links that were provided by our partner that essentially they were able to track which page a user was clicking from on our website to get to their landing pages. So we had down here, we had a patient testimonial, patient story. So again, you talk about patient collaboration, him sharing his story, and considering the high amount of patients who have this diagnosis, sharing a patient story and really amplifying this content was very beneficial to our community. So this patient, the patient story, so we shared it via the via like Facebook. So we have some feedback here, just people sharing their story, how much they appreciate it because they could relate to it. And then I'll just kind of skim through for the purpose of time here. Another great thing that we did with this partner, we do it with other partners as well, is we have a virtual education program known as CRC Talks. And in the development of this, we actually, to determine what the topics are, we actually poll our online communities to get an idea from them and find out what topics they would like to best hear about. So we kind of build it around a collection of both clinical and psychosocial type topics. And then we also have an end of program survey that allows us to collect information about who our viewers are, what information they felt was important. And then after the live program, we actually host it on our Alliance YouTube page so that we can track our demand viewing. So, and then just my last slide here is, this is just kind of an example of some engagement metrics that we provided. This was specifically around the content when we updated it on Blue HQ. We had social media posts. We were able to track people who clicked through to that social media post to the content. But we were able to build out a very well-structured, spaced out timing for each phase of the project, and then social media posts and other ways to track different ways, or track other metrics as well for engagement.
Thank you. That's really, really detailed, and I think as a creator as well, I'm sure Catherine will admit, it's so nice to know that the work that you've put in, and for the patients who invested that time, that it's actually having an impact and being used. So, Bob, would you like to add anything to that point, or is that okay from your side?
No. All I would say is I know that WMUK and the IWMF they cover those matrix downloads, hits, engagements with public messages, etc., etc. Basically, what Catherine and Heather have both said. Yeah.
Thank you. So, and where we have about 8 minutes left, so what I'd like to do is just deal with a couple of questions from the audience. And then I'd like to hear each of you, your thoughts about what you'd like to see in the future in this area. And we can wrap up. So the first question, I think this one's probably more for Heather. Do you have any advice to young life science companies? When should they reach out to patient associations for the first time?
Whenever you're ready. So at the Alliance, we have a partner with us page, and we receive inquiries all the time. These are actually requests that I manage myself if they're industry partners or potential industry partners for that matter. We will receive the inquiry and then I'll send the email back. So essentially, whenever you're ready, if you just want to simply connect and start to build a relationship, that's great. If you have a project in mind and a way for patients to get involved, we'd be happy to sit down and talk with you more about it.
Great. So I think it's an interesting question, of course, because a lot of industry-sponsored awareness is centered around perhaps treatments that are in the pipeline or potential treatments that are in the pipeline. And the question sometimes comes up, when's too early? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4?
It's never too early. No. We have partners, industry organizations that connect with us when they are getting ready to launch a clinical trial, whether they want us to help spread awareness, review protocol. There's a number of reasons as to why someone would partner with us prior to a project starting. So no, it's never too soon. And again, even if it's just to get the connection and relationship going, and then we can schedule meetings as things progress, that's great.
Great, thank you. And I think this next question will be one for Bob. Are there any recognized patient advocate training or certifications to augment the professionalism and visibility for their critical roles?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, as far as WM in the UK, so WM UK, I know it's something they're working hard to set up courses, because let's remember, the people that run these groups can themselves come under stress from running the groups. So there does need to be a recognised training sort of system in place. And I know that there's something they were certainly looking at it last year, and I believe they're still developing that. So yeah, training the group leaders to be group leaders and to recognise some of the issues that they might confront, because all the group leaders are volunteers, most of them patients, a couple not. But yeah, very important point.
Does anyone know of any general certification or training, or is it always, or all you've seen is related to a particular group?
No, there
Catherine?
is actually. Yeah, I'm nodding. I'm thinking, can I share my LinkedIn feed? Because I'm always getting loads of posts from the. I mean, UPATI is worth looking at. The European Patient. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. Very that they are about patient advocacy, connecting patient advocacy with industry partners. They're very big. They're very well known. There are definitely trainings out there. Perhaps if we can answer, somebody's asked whether we can answer specific questions in our after. I can certainly put some links in there if people would like to learn how to be an advocate. Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll send any further links along with the slides and the recording in the follow-up email. So we have about 4 minutes left. That's 1 minute left for each of you to answer the question, what would you like to see in the future in this area? Who wants to go first?
I'll give a go. I'll have a go at that. What I will say at the moment is, certainly for the WM world, it's exciting times. Got amazing drug innovation, new drugs coming through one after the other, amazing clinical trials, still looking for a cure for this incurable disease. And what we're seeing lately is with digital, the digital world that we now live in is real world data, either through there's two great registries, the Rory Morrison registry here in the UK, which is a global registry for submitting data, real-time data. And then in Australia, they've got a fantastic one that's global called Whimsical, where patients input their data, all going into research. And then even now we're moving into the world of, so I've got my little watch on here, which is recording real-time data about me and my condition, and submitting it for real-time research. So some great innovations in relation to the future for my condition, and I'm sure it's happening with other conditions as well.
Thank you, Rob. Catherine?
I would like to see no patient resource ever produced that didn't involve patients from the beginning to feed into that resource, to say where the information gaps were, and to input into the content. Not just being given it at the end of the process and being told, hey, look, we've made you a booklet. What do you think? That's what I'd like to see.
Perfect. And Heather?
So I would just like to say, as someone who represents a patient advocacy organization, that I would continue to encourage industry partners to be involved. And I just want to share an exchange. I helped connect one of my recently used patients. I use her for a lot of projects, but she helped out one of our partners with an event that she attended last week. And just some feedback from the industry partner and the patient themselves. So the patient, when I reached out to her, I'm always apologetic because I used her for a lot, because she has an incredible story to tell. She is such an advocate, and she's so well spoken, and she's just such a wonderful person. But she says to me that being a part of these opportunities are quote unquote therapeutic for her, and it brings her great joy to do anything she can do to help in the fight against cancer. And then the feedback from our partner after this patient attended last week says, I cannot thank you enough for the generous introduction. She was in Indianapolis with us earlier last week, and I speak for everyone at the organization when I share our gratitude for the opportunity to meet her, spend time with her, and have her share her story with us. She provided us with many meaningful insights and such thoughtful reflections on her experiences. Thank you so much for this connection. So that just warms my heart, because you can see right there the connection between an organization that cares about finding a treatment for her diagnosis and the patient being involved is so, so vital.
That is really the perfect note
Powerful.
to end, and unfortunately
Yeah.
we have to end it now. So the first thing I'd like to do is express my heartfelt thanks to all three of you. I learned a lot from this webinar, and in particular, I think that the patient perspective, which I think can only really come across in this way of communicating, and not just something you can read from a book or from a web page. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing your experiences with us. So we have covered a lot. It is the end of the webinar, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the conversation. Karger we're a small independent company, and we're open to discuss more about your needs, and particularly if you're interested in helping to create some patient-driven resources. So when we send out the email with the slides and the answers to any questions and links, there'll also be a way to contact us if you found this inspiring, interesting, and you'd like to find out more, and if there's any chance we could collaborate together. So to all of you who stayed for the full hour, thank you so much for your attention. I know there's a million other things you could be doing with your browser, and thanks for focusing on this and hearing these stories and best practices. Wish you all a very nice rest of the day, wherever you are. Goodbye.